Given the events of the past 2 weeks, Russia's warnings for NATO to halt expansion towards its territory seem to have been all but forgotten. But they were acknowledged by the West more than 2 decades ago when the current US president warned that NATO expansion into Eastern Europe could provoke Russia.
I think the one place where the greatest consternation would be caused in the short term would be to admit the Baltic states now in terms of NATO-Russian, US-Russian relations. And if there was ever anything that was going to tip the balance, were it to be tipped in terms of a vigorous and hostile reaction, I don't mean military, in Russia, it would be that.
NATO nevertheless did expand into the Baltic states, and despite there still being no direct confrontation with Russia, the military alliance is upping its combat readiness, with Latvia recently announcing an increase in its military budget to reach NATO target figures. A former NATO Supreme Allied Commander said President Putin's actions have reinvigorated the alliance.
I spent 4 years as Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. At every conference, every meeting of high-level NATO officials, I would find my way to Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany and the Minister of Defense, Ursula von der Leyen, and I would say to them, you've got to raise your defense spending. And I got nowhere in 4 years. In 48 hours, Vladimir Putin has inspired the Germans to effectively nearly double their defense budget, a smart move on the part of Germans. Vladimir Putin may be the best thing that ever happened to the NATO alliance.
You have the impression that Western leaders are going on with a sort of living in a fiction world, heading us all toward disaster as if they didn't notice it. I mean, they're heading us for economic disaster. They're heading us for world war, just in order to show that they are more democratic than other parts of the world. And in Russia, it's all virtue signaling. And these leaders are not looking out for the welfare of their countries at all. They're just taking wild risks. There's also people calling for actually getting NATO into a war with Russia over Ukraine, which is, of course, totally insane, but that exists. And I don't see sensible people I mean, there are sensible people in the West. In the United States, there are sensible people, but they are very far out of power. They have been marginalized.